Okay, so this is homework section 3.2. And the goal in this section is to get the variable on one side of the equation and the number on the other. So let's start with this example. So if we have x minus 6 equals negative 2 plus 7. Now, before we start thinking about shifting things around so we can get the letter alone on one side, why don't we, on the right side, go ahead and perform that operation? We can go ahead and subtract because it's opposite signs to take the sign of the larger number. So I'm just going to write x minus 6. We're not doing anything on this side yet. And on the opposite side, we're going to end up with an answer. We're going to subtract that, and we end up with 5. All right, now that we've handled that, I'm going to go ahead and get this 6 over to the right side. And the rule states if we add this to one side, this will end up zeroing out. And what you do to one side, you must do to the other. So if I rewrite this equation, it's x equals 11. And that's your final answer. Okay, so let's try a different one. Now, what if we have something like 2w minus 5w equals 9? Okay, well, the first thing I would do is I'd say, on the left side, I can combine like terms. So that way we can get it down to 1w. So remember the rule states we convert this to a plus sign, make that the opposite. Now we can see we subtract, take the sign of the larger number, and that will give us a 3w. And on the right side, we did nothing with the 9. Now, how do we get the 3 off of the w? Well, remember, a negative 3 divided by a negative 3, the signs are the same, so you'll get a positive answer, and that equals 1. So if we divide it out by negative 3, this will reduce down to 1, and then 1 times w just equals w, right? So on one side of the equation, we have a w. Oops, hold on. We have a w, but don't forget what we do to one side. What we do to one side, we must do to the other. So these are opposite signs, so we're going to end up with a negative answer, and the final answer is a negative 3. Okay, now I'll put this alongside because I want to show you the difference between the two. Now the other example, if we had something like 8 minus 18, and that equals z over negative 9. So now you can see the difference between over here when it's multiplied versus when it's a fraction over here. So let's first take care of the left side of the equation. So remember, convert that to a plus, make that the opposite. So now we're going to go ahead and subtract it and take the sign of the larger number, which is a negative 10, equals, and I'm just going to rewrite this here, negative 9. Now, how do I get that 9 out of that denominator? Well, we can multiply it by negative 9 because that's the same scenario. Negative 9 over negative 9 will give us a positive 1. So we know this reduces down to a 1. And then 1 times z is just z. Okay, and what we do to one side, we must do to the other. So we must make sure that we multiply this side by negative 9. So when I rewrite that, that should be negative 9 times negative 10 equals z. And then we have 90, because two negatives, signs are the same. When you're multiplying, will give you a positive answer. So that's the difference between these two. All right, so another example, let's clear that out. So if we had something like this, negative 3x minus 3x equals 27 minus 3. Well, before I start shifting things around so I can get the letter isolated, I can immediately see that I can combine on both sides of the equation. So on the left side, I can go ahead, that's the same thing as negative 3 minus 3, which we know we convert that to a plus, make that the opposite. So this answer here is going to be a negative 6. So over on this side, we get negative 6x. So again, what we did is we took this and made it like that because we're adding integers. And then this equals, and then 27 minus 3, we know that answer is 24. Okay, so we see this negative 6 is attached to that x by multiplication. So we've learned that if we divide it out, we can get that to reduce to a 1, and what you do to one side, you must do to the other. So our final answer here would be, and remember, opposite signs will give you a -4 answer. All right, let's try another one. So if we have something like x over 47 equals a -38 plus 4. Well, immediately I can see on this left side of the equation, I can go ahead and subtract that. So let me just rewrite this because I'm not going to do anything on this side. But on the other side, I'm going to subtract it and take the sign of the larger number. Okay, now what do we do to get that 47 out of the denominator? Well, we multiply it by 47. When we do that, we know that will reduce down to 1. And what we do to one side, we must do to the other. So x equals, and these are opposite signs, you'll end up with a negative answer. And when you plug that into the calculator, you'll end up with a result of 1,598. And there's your final answer. Okay, what if I have something like this, -8? And if I'm going too fast, just know you could always pause and replay problems. So if I have -8 minus 9 equals, and we have 3x plus 5 minus 2x. So immediately I'm going to take care of the work on the left side of the equation. So I'm going to convert to that plus, make that a negative. So we know now that that's, you add it and keep the sign, which is -17. And then over here on the right side, I can combine these two because they have the same variable. And that will give me the result of 1x. And I'm going to add that to 5. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and move things around. I'm going to take this 5 and bring it over to this side of the equation. So we've learned if we subtract it out, that'll zero out. And what you do to one side, you must do to the other. So we have -17 minus 5 equals, and just know 1x is the same thing as just x. So we're just going to write x. Now all we have to do is just convert that to a plus, make that a minus, and then we know we're going to just go ahead and add it up and keep the sign, which is a -22 equals x. There you go. There's your final answer. Okay, let's do another one. All right, so how about if we have something like this? We have -4 times -5 minus 2x equals 9x, like that. Well, there's nothing we can do inside the parentheses. We can't combine those, so we can go ahead and distribute here, which we learned in our previous section. So the first one, 2 negatives gives us a positive when we're multiplying out. Sorry about that. So this would be a -20. And then when we multiply the next, it would be plus 8x. Don't forget the x equals 9x because we didn't do anything with that yet. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move this 8x over here so both the x's are on one side and the numbers on the other. So we just, for this one, we're going to subtract 8x from one side. That'll zero out, and we must do that to the other side. What you do to one side, you must do to the other. So I'm just going to rewrite that as -20 equals 9x minus 8x. We can see that it becomes -20 equals, and when you subtract that, that's 1x. And again, we've learned that that's 1x just equals x, so -20 equals x. And that's your final answer there. Okay, let's try another one. So let's try this. If we have 5 times 4y minus 1 equals 15y. So on the left side, we can go ahead. We can't combine anything in the parentheses, so we have to distribute by multiplying that out. So we end up with 20y minus 5 on that side, and I'm just rewriting the 15y. Same scenario. I'm going to take this and let's move this over here so all the y's are on one side and the numbers remain on the other. So this was a 15, I'm sorry. So if I subtract this out, minus 20y, that'll zero. And we can do the same thing on this side. So to rewrite that, that would be a -5 equals 15y minus 20y. So what I'm going to do is now I can see that the same variable on the right side. So I'm just going to change that to a plus, make that the opposite sign. So I'm just rewriting this. And then when I subtract those, keep the sign of the larger number. And then we end up with 5y here. All right, now to get that -5 off that y, just -5, remember, because that will reduce down to 1. And what you do to one side, you do to the other. So our final answer, and to remember, when the signs are the same, you end up with a positive answer. So that's our final answer right there. All right, let's do another. Okay, so if we have something like -6, and then we have x plus 2 in parentheses, and we subtract 13 on one side of the equation, and on the other side of the equation, we have 12 plus 5. Now you can already see on the right side of the equation, we're just going to add that up so we can simplify it. But over on the left side, we can't do anything inside the parentheses, so we're going to end up distributing. So when I start multiplying that out, I end up with -6x, and then -12 because the signs are opposite, and I'm just writing -13 because I didn't do anything with that. And on the left side, I can just go ahead and add that up, which that is 17. Okay, now looking back on the left side, I can see I can combine these two. So I'm going to make that a plus, convert that to an opposite sign. And now you can see I'm just going to rewrite the -6x. I'm not doing anything. But the -12 plus -13, we're going to add it up and keep the sign, which will give you -25 and equals 17. We're not doing anything with that 17 yet. Now, to get the 6x alone, I'm going to go ahead and take this and move it over. So to do that, I got to make sure I subtract it out by the opposite. So that zeroes out. And what you do to one side, you must do to the other. So I end up with -6x equals, and then when I add those two numbers up, 17 to 25, I end up with 42. Now we know to get that 6 off that x, we divide it out. So that reduces down to a 1. And what you do to one side, you must do to the other. So you got to pay attention to whether it's a negative positives. It's because you always want to end up with a positive 1. Okay? So you keep the signs exactly the same on both the left and the right. So our final answer here will be x equals a -7. And that's your final answer. All right, so I'm going to do one more for this section. So the final one that I want to show you, okay, would be -3 minus 7 equals a -6 plus x. Okay, so we can see on the left side, we can do some work. We're going to convert that, make it the opposite here. So now we add up, they're both negatives. So it's going to be a -10. You add them, keep the sign. And on the opposite side, we didn't do anything yet. Now, this is simple. All we have to do is just move the number over on this side so we can get that x alone. And when we do that, remember, all you're going to do is make it by the opposite to subtract it out. And what you do to one side, you must do to the other. So let me just rewrite that. So we have -10 plus 6 equals x. And then we can see opposite signs. Subtract, take the sign of the larger number, and it's -4 equals x. Hope this helps.